All right, now I promised you this, and I'm delighted to welcome to the show a distinguished Maori academic, but also leader, who hails from the University of Waikato, Rahui Papa. Well, he hails from the Tainui, basically, but also is involved with the University of Waikato. He's been a major negotiator for Waikato Tainui's outstanding treating claims. He's also previously chaired the Waikato Chief Tainui Executive, and he plays an integral role in the iwi Leaders Forum, providing advice to ministers, plural, and Crown officials on matters of national significance as they affect Māori. Welcome to the show, Rahui Papa. Good morning to you.
Kia ora, good morning.
Rahui, thank you for coming on the show, because I am an ignorant Pākehā when it comes to certain Māori traditional customs. So I am desirous of being informed and educated, and I'm particularly interested in this concept of rāhui. Can you take me through it, please? When a rāhui is put upon, and there's just been the case, one in Taranaki and another one in the Taieri, where somebody has drowned and a rāhui is placed upon that area, A, what are they? And B, what do they do?
Yeah, so a rāhui is placed on a certain site when a calamity happens or a disaster happens. For example, if there's a death or if there's something that has been really in the spiritual realm has affected that place in space. And so what the kaumātua do is they perform a particular karakia to make that place restricted, have restricted access to that place for a certain amount of time, especially in our waterways, because and one of the main reasons is that there are still a lot of food gathering that happens within those places, and because of the death that those spiritually and actually physically, some of the flow-on effects of that death will affect the food. And so what we don't want is our whānau to be eating the remains of, various people. And so a karakia is placed on that site for a particular amount of time. And then when that when the people or the community feel that time has passed, then there will be a lifting of the rāhui. And so it's not a forever thing. It's really a temporary measure to restrict access for both the spiritual and the physical well-being of all of the community.
Okay. I understand that rāhui were put in for traditional customary fishing reasons into the Fishings Act in 1996. The rāhui you're talking about at the moment for when people have drowned, does that have legislative sanction as well?
Not necessarily legislative sanction, but it has become quite a commonplace agreement between a number of iwi and their settlements that the protection of the tikanga and the kawa customs of the tribal groups in various areas has. So there is some legislative understanding through the settlements, but other than the Fisheries Act, it hasn't sort of become the norm in legislative circles.
Right. So let's just say you've got, and the Taieri mouth's a really good one, exactly. I think somebody drowned crossing the bar. Does it matter if that person's Pākehā or Māori who drowns?
No, it doesn't, because it's the death or the calamity that's the particular reason that rāhui is put on there. So it doesn't matter whether they're Māori, Pākehā, Chinese, Indian. It doesn't really matter. It's the calamity that causes the rāhui to be enacted.
Right. Now, I understand the basis of, it's a bit like the Old Testament, really, isn't it? There's a reason for a whole series of what seemed arcane Jewish rituals, because initially they had some sort of health focus, like don't eat pork and things like that. And you've just explained to me that there might be a health basis on this, like if there's a body there and it's decomposing, you don't want to gather fish or area from that way because of the potential contamination of food sources. Did that come first and then the spiritual dimension second?
both of them actually go together. So in the Māori worldview, spirituality or the wairua and the tinana or the physical actually have to go together. The spiritual korowai and the is really for the protection of the health and well-being of the community, and so when they go together, that's when the integrity of the spiritual world and the physical world are actually joined together.
Okay, now let's just say, because there are lots of atheist Pākehā out there who would say, anything to do with the spiritualism or the supernatural is nonsense, regardless if it's Māori, Pākehā, Chinese, or any other culture. And those persons, say, went surf casting where a rāhui had been done. What happens then? Nothing.
Well, actually, it's up to the local hapu and the iwi to keep our wider community informed. And so, it will be a conversation. So it's not there's no sort of jail term for transgressing rāhui, but actually it's the understanding. And in our view, everything has a mauri. The sea has a mauri, the rivers have a mauri, the mountains have a mauri, every stone and blade of grass have a mauri, and so does every person. And so it's really trying to build that enlightenment and that education to our whānau to hopefully understand that it's not a forever thing, but there is a time where it is deemed to be restricted for those times. So it's the conversation, it's the education, it's the enlightenment about the Māori worldview as it relates to those things that are bound from Te Tiriti o Waitangi, actually.
Okay, to our Māori, the Māori worldview, it's a concept that's new to many Pākehā, and many ordinary New Zealanders. It's become more prominent perhaps over the last 5 years as co-governance issues have been talked, and particularly as Te Tiriti has been promoted actively by central government and by local government too. It'd be fair to say that it's meeting in certain quarters some resistance, for example, around whether or not karakia should commence local government meetings and the like. Is one of the problems that it's being imposed rather than discussed and talked about beforehand?
No, I think there's just a fundamental disagreement of the minds, really. I would appreciate that there would need to be a corridor and just an understanding about why some of these sorts of things happen. Look, we know that there are people that are fundamentally opposed to the inclusions of Te Ao Māori sort of thinking, but there's a vast a majority that actually embrace the culturality of Te Ao Māori in things like meetings, and things like policy settings, and things like bylaws, and a whole raft of those things have actually been inclusive, and so Te Ao Māori viewpoints are not a scary thing. It's actually when tikanga and best practice meet together, then all of those things are embellished. They're supported in every way, shape, or form. It's when the opposition sort of comes on a fundamental ignorance or a fundamental not knowing about the depths of the thinking behind them, that's when problems will arise.
Well, can I give an example of that, though, and where this clash is clearly occurring? You would have seen a couple of high-profile cases already this year, Rahui, and some around karakia. Karakia, to me, is and I think you would agree, a spiritual or invocation, if you like, a prayer for the seeking of some sort of supernatural intervention into an event, very like a Christian prayer, I guess, and in fact many of them are based upon Christianity as well as the old Maori gods. What do you say to somebody who is an atheist, agnostic, doesn't believe that there should be a spiritual element added to the secular order of meetings or gatherings?
Well, to see, that's one of the fundamental things too. So karakia versus inoi. So a karakia is an acknowledgement of those things around. Like, for example, when you do a karakia, it's not actually asking for anything. It's actually just it is an acknowledgement of those things that were here well before we were. But inui is a difference. So that's where give us this day our daily bread sort of thing. You're actually asking for something. So that's a more Christianized basis of prayer giving, whereas karakia is in its purest form an acknowledgement of the powers that be. For example, it's the thunder and the lightning. You don't necessarily have to acknowledge them, but it would be very, very foolish of someone to really not take into account the fullness of the power that they can bring. And so in our view, in a Te Ao Māori view, a karakia is about acknowledging those things by placating them. When you acknowledge something, you automatically placate them for a better, best practice type tikanga/tikanga way going forward.
All right, so I can understand if I'm going on to marae that Māori culture and customs and Te Ao Māori would predominate. But in a setting like, let's just say, recently, I don't know if you've read, but in Otago, there was an Otago regional councillor who got up saying that karakia had no role at the introduction of a council meeting, and in that particular case, attended wholly by Pākehā, no Māori staff or audience involved at all. And he objected philosophically to the place of karakia at the start of a particular meeting. Do you think he had a legitimate grievance given that there wasn't a Māori dimension to the particular meeting?
Well, look, yes and no. So the no part is that actually the question could be asked, what does it actually take away from the meeting? So people are fearful about being subsumed. But actually a karakia is about, just starting it off on a good note. Just like, you might say good morning or kia ora or something like that. That's those types of things. But, it's up to those that are facilitating the hui. It's up to those that are facilitating the meeting, what sort of introductory comments will be set off. And so it'll be really whether that's appropriate. That's up to the people that attend the hui, and it's not really, so karakia and those types of things aren't really designed to be a yardstick that you have to follow, but they are something that is there for to start off the meeting or the hui in a good stead.
But again, it's sort of like if I came onto marae and brought a particularly unique Pākehā way of opening a meeting and then said, I want to impose this, it would be a bit infra-dig, wouldn't it? It would be a bit rude. So surely the analogy or the conclusion works the other way too. If you were to bring in something that is Te Ao Māori into what would clearly be a almost wholly Pākehā or, European concept, they don't belong, do they? They live in two different worlds.
Well, not necessarily, because one of the things about karakia is that there are many ways, shapes and forms to do it. So there are many cultures, many belief systems, many different ways about the acknowledgement of something that happens. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a karakia Māori. But if you really wanted to start your hui off in a good stead, then it would be at the facilitation of those people. Of course, when you enter onto a marae, that tikanga and kawa would be at play for the different dialectal and regional variances of those marae across the country. But absolutely, we don't have to be devoid of some of those things, and it doesn't have to take long, and it doesn't have to be scary or imposing anyone's personal beliefs. It could be something that makes a part or all of the audience a little bit more settled.
Right. Okay. So it would seem, though, that you'd be aware of Professor Richard Dawkins, for example, who is this world famous, I guess is the word best described, atheist, who has argued long against the import or the impost of spirituality into the lives of humanity in general. So it doesn't matter whether it's Christian, Muslim, Maori, whatever. Whatever invocation of the supernatural exists, people like Richard Dawkins and those humanists or atheists would say it has no place in everyday existence. You can go and practice that somewhere else, but not here, because you are infringing upon my liberty and my choice to eschew what they would consider that kind of nonsense. How do you react to that, though? I mean, do you accept that that's a valid viewpoint?
That's a valid viewpoint for him. The actual kaupapa is that if he wanted to call and facilitate the meeting or the gathering or whatever, then he could do it in his own way, because there would be an audience that would probably agree with that type of thing. But I'm not going to be hamstrung by the views of one or a few people. Actually, everyone has their right to have their input into the facilitation of the hui. And if it helps Māori to be, if it helps Māori and New Zealand communities to be a little bit more settled, then he probably he doesn't have to take part in it. But it would be something that Te Ao Māori would insist on in particular contexts.
Yeah, if he was on the marae or something like that. And finally, co-governance. I know I didn't want to talk about Rahui, but co-governance in particular. I guess I don't know what it means, and let me explain. I am an elected member of a local council. I've been a member of Parliament. I sat on Parliament's Māori Affairs Select Committee for 6 years. I've done my public law on the Treaty of Waitangi and on the principles that are espoused through the courts and through various acts of legislation. But I still couldn't, if somebody asked me, define what co-governance is. I understand that it is the concept of Māori being involved in some way, shape or form in the governance of a particular organisation or body. But I don't know if that means it's a 50-50 thing, if it's a proportionate to population thing, if it is just a tokenistic thing. What does it mean to you, Rahui?
So co-governance to me means sharing. It means the sharing of kōrero. It means the sharing of decision-making. And, of course, from a Te Ao Māori point of view, as prescribed by Te Tiriti o Waitangi, that it means an honoured partnership, in my view. So, in the late 1990s and through into the 2000s, we saw the advent of co-governance and co-management of things like the Waikato River, where actually, it has been a 50-50. So the government appoints half of the groups, generally from councils, and the iwi along the river appoint the other half of the governance group. That has led to actually stronger relationships across the board, and it's just so commonplace now for the Waikato River and for parts of the Waikato that it actually has blossomed into stronger relationships. In my view, co-governance is an active partnership, an active, honoured partnership where everyone's views is taken into account, especially from the basis point of the Te Tiriti o Waitangi.
Okay, but does that mean 50-50 or not?
In my
50%
view, yes.
Maori, 50%. Okay, so it does. So even though Maori only make up 17% of the population of this country, you would argue that the Treaty of Waitangi says that this is an equal partnership of 50-50 going forward. Yeah.
Yeah, so that thought basis comes from the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, where there was a commitment to active partnership between Māori and the government and the governor of the day. And so it's by virtue of Te Tiriti o Waitangi that we enjoy shared spaces and shared living arrangements, really, in Aotearoa. And so the commitment made in 1840 should ring true in 2023, in my view.
Okay, that's fair enough. What about my view? So if I say I'll go to the Court of Appeal in 1986, you'd be aware of the decisions of the courts around the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, which unfortunately the courts were required to interpret because Parliament hadn't. What about the view that Justice Wild and the court put forward that a partnership doesn't need to be equal to be effective, that there can be one dominant partner? Because, can I give you, for example, in terms of government, ultimately decisions have to be made. They can acknowledge that Māori might have a view on it, and those views are sincerely sought and discussed. But ultimately, the final decision rests with this authority, be it Parliament or the courts. Does that sit comfortably with you?
Well, I understand the argument. My viewpoint, though, is that until those Article 3 of Te Tiriti o Waitangi is fulfilled, where we are not the overproportionate ones in the bottom of the heap of all of the stats, because there are some real responses and some real solutions within Māoridom for the ills of Māoridom. But as you say, there has always been the thinking of a dominant type of demographic that looks after the purse strings, and generally it's he who pays says. And so really, if Māori were to really put their minds together to find these solutions and things like that with the adequate resourcing, then it would be of greater benefit to the country as a whole. I understand the argument. I just think that there are real key and core lessons to be learned from those that have been here for a long, long time. And really, for Te Tiriti o Waitangi, it is about grabbing those ideas, listening to those ideas, and giving effect to those ideas. I would be very happy in certain circumstances to turn the tables on that argument and say, actually, why can't you let Māori be the dominant culture for some of these things? And it couldn't get any worse for Māoridom and for the country. It could only get better, in my view.
An interesting concept, because you're essentially arguing devolution, aren't you, rather than partnership?
Well, I'm saying that we can ill afford to let the government devolve or to get away from their obligations, but they must do it with Māori. And as we've seen in various sort of areas where we have actually agreed to sit around the table in an equality type discussion, actually some really cool things have happened. So our catchphrases, when the rangatiratanga prescribed in Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the kāwanatanga prescribed in the Tiriti o Waitangi, that's where the magic happens.
And of course, the other thing is, from somebody like my point of view, and I'm sure you can appreciate too, and you must come across it all the time, the treaty was signed almost 200 years ago, as you know. It was two very, very different peoples in different states of civilization, actually. There's nothing to suggest at that time that we'd look back on either European or Maori society in the 1840s and go, wow, that's the apogee of civilization there. There's been enormous change in our own country, not just in terms of physical change, but also in terms of thinking. The interrelationship between the races, I don't think, could have been anticipated to the degree it has either, in terms of intermarriage and the mixing of bloods. Do we rightly ask whether or not the treaty has any real validity other than historical acknowledgement now? Does the treaty really offer for us a solution for New Zealand when so many of the international problems we face are international and so many of the solutions that we find must also be?
Yeah, so, and thanks for the viewpoint. In my opinion, yes, it does, because it actually guarantees Māori the right to sit around and have the discussion without, if we moved away from that into, say, a constitutional sort of discussion, then we would have to be rewriting some of these principles, and we would have to be in agreement to some of them. But actually, there was a document signed in 1835, was the Te Whakaputanga, or the Declaration of Independence. That was something that was given up, really, in 1840 to accept Te Tiriti o Waitangi, although there are some that vehemently tried to hold by those principles as well. Just so we know that there was more than just Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And in a modern context and age, actually active partnership would be probably the key discussion, and how do we give effect to that so that one part of the demographic of this country doesn't feel like they've been jilted, doesn't feel like they've been cheated, and doesn't feel like they have no say over the destiny of them and their people.
Rahui, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate the conversation. I like to think that this conversation will be ongoing, and that we can talk to you about things in which our worlds not collide, but coalesce on occasion. On occasions collide, though. And thank you for being so open to that conversation.
No problem, Michael, and thank you for allowing, on your platform, as it were, the viewpoints to be expressed, and I'm more than happy. I'm never backward about coming forward with my views.
Good on you. Thanks very much, Rahui. Look after yourself, mate. Have a good day.